Start recording. So really chuffed today to be able to get Niamh and Andy back on, but especially stoked to have Louise from JJ Corry. Going to tell us a little bit more in depth. Unfortunately, I messed up last time without recording Niamh and Andy, so we'll get that to rights today. I hope you've all got a little bit of Irish whiskey in front of you. And what we'll do today is, because Louise has to get off at some point, so we're going to dive straight into talking to Louise and hopefully learn a little bit more about the product and drink a little bit of whiskey with her. So I'll hand it over to you, Louise, if you can just give us a little bit of a background into yourself, and then we'll start firing some questions.
Yeah, like so I founded the business JJ Corry in 2015 is when I founded it, and I did that kind of on the back of working for huge big drinks companies like Diageo and Pernod Ricard and Moët Hennessy, and I had spent like my whole career really working on kind of higher end spirits and champagnes and things like that. But the back end of my career with Diageo was spent with a lot of the Johnny Walker higher marks and classic malt collection and things like that. So worked with whiskey my whole career, packed it all in, just had enough of the corporate thing. It's kind of like, you know, that scene in Harry Potter, there's a tunnel and there's a Death Eater like sucking the life out of the kid. It's like that towards the end, I think, your corporate career. So I left, and I could kind of see in about 2013 that the Irish whiskey industry was going to kind of start to move into the whole independent craft lane, just like America had done several years before, and that was kind of happening in gin as well in the UK. So Jameson was really kind of paving the way globally for Irish whiskey and kind of bringing it back onto a global stage, and they did a great job in doing that. And I felt like there's probably going to be room for more independent producers within the Irish whiskey category, which there just hadn't been for about 100 years, other than John Teeling at Cooley, really. So I just packed it all in and wrote a business plan. And I'm very, very lucky. I was born on a farm here on the west coast of Ireland, a small dairy farm, and my dad still farms it. So I was able to kind of have a bit of land and say, okay, if I'm going to set up a business, I'll just move back to the west coast of Ireland and do it on the farm, because my brother doesn't farm, neither do I. So the kind of future of the family farm was, what's going to happen? Irish people don't sell their land. We're really weird about it. We tend to keep it in the family for generations and generations. So I figured setting up an Irish whiskey business and saving the family farm at the same time was probably a good endeavor. And it also got me out of the corporate kind of train that I was on, basically, and allowed me to live my life a bit better, to be honest.
I mean, what intrigues me is, obviously, in Ireland, you're classed as a bonder rather than an independent bottler. Could you kind of just explain a little bit of the difference between the two? You know, I mean, most of us on here will know, but anybody in the future watching it might not understand the difference.
Yeah, so look, I spent a lot of time, like I said, working on Johnny Walker. You know, Johnny Walker would have been classified probably as a bonder way back in the day when he first kind of set up. The way that we interpret bonding in the modern age is that we're actually trying to make sure that it does stand for something moving forward and it's differentiated. But in order to explain that, I'll have to tell you a little bit about the history of it in Ireland in general.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, because it was unique to Ireland, like in terms of the terminology used around it and the methodology. So Irish whiskey used to be enormous. We used to be more widespread and more popular than Scotch, like way back in the day. And then obviously you guys will know the story, like Irish whiskey, just in a 50-year period, the whole industry basically collapsed. And that was through all sorts of missteps in not, taking on new technology like the coffee still, and, everything from wars of independence to civil war and prohibition and all of that stuff. But before the Irish whiskey industry sort of collapsed, and the real collapse was kind of done by the 1920s, really, the 1930s, like that's when the industry looked completely different to what it had done 50 years prior. Prior to that, whiskey bonders were a very important element of the Irish whiskey industry. So, and by that I mean a lot of the big distilleries didn't bother bottling and maturing and blending or anything like and selling to selling basically. They just started produced, and they sold on to bonders. And there was two kinds of bonders. There was the big guys up in Dublin and up north, like who were in big port towns, even like Limerick to some degree, and Dublin and up north. And they were producing whiskey, so they were buying in whiskey in huge, vast amounts, and then branding it, and then shipping it off internationally, off to the Americas and all the new colonies essentially around the world. So that was one kind of facet of the bonding trade, and that was a huge, means of getting Irish whiskey out to the world essentially. And all of the kind of maturation and blending and everything would have been done in big government warehouses up in Dublin essentially. Then there was the smaller guys like JJ Corry, who we've named who's a bonder here basically up in the 1890s. And JJ Corry is not a unique story. There was 2 or 3 or 5 JJ Corrys in every town in Ireland. And they tended to be small scale whiskey bonders. Like they had a little shop that would have sold everything, like a little hardware shop near you or a mercantile. They would have sold tea from India. They would have sold rum. They would have sold sherry. They would have sold port, wine, flour, musical parts, musical instruments, ammunition, you kind of name it. And they were just little kind of mercantiles. And very often what they would do is, back in the day, in the 1890s, we were a British colony at the time. So we had kind of a merchant class and a landlord class and everything. Those bonders would create bespoke small kind of housekeepers blends for, the Glynn merchant family in Kilrush, or the Vandeleur landlords in Kilrush, for example. So it was a very kind of bespoke methodology of kind of custom blended whiskies for people. The JJ Corry in particular would have gotten his whiskey most likely from Limerick. There was a pretty vibrant distillery scene in Limerick back when he was operational, and the town was connected by a steam packet 3 times a day up the Shannon River. So he would have just taken whatever casks he had lying around in the shop and then sent them off to Limerick to be filled up, brought them back, matured them for as long as he felt was necessary probably, and custom blended whiskey for his customers then. It was just a very, very common model that was all over Ireland. You'll still see evidence of it now with pubs all over Ireland with the term whiskey bonder over the door. The last whiskey bonder in Ireland, the last kind of holdout, was Mitchell and Sons. They were the last one that were really very operational, who used to bond green spot, red spot, etc., all the spots, etc. They shut down in about 1958, I think, 1959. And then that was kind of it. Like, what happened with the bonders is that, like, the distilleries that were left on the island of Ireland by the 1930s decided to control the route to market, and they stopped selling to bonders. So everybody kind of ran out of supply. So that's the heritage of it. In terms of, I'll pause if you have another question, but
no, carry on. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the backstory of it. So it was a massive, important part of the Irish whiskey industry. And I didn't know that, right, when I started the business. And not a lot of people knew that, I think. Like, it was kind of one of those bits of knowledge or heritage that just wasn't talked about. You had to go and kind of look it up. And the reason for that is really simple. It didn't fit the narrative that the few companies that were selling whiskey in Ireland 10 years ago had. Like, that wasn't the narrative that they told. And that was the only narrative being told around Irish whiskey. So you had to do a bit of digging for it. And I just thought it was a really interesting angle, because the whole Irish whiskey industry is being reborn. And if it's going to be reborn and, go into a new era and be competitive and be, definable again moving forward and differentiated, all of it should be reborn, essentially. So I realized after digging a lot into parliamentary archives, because we were a colony at the time, and sort of digging into a lot of kind of debates between the mayor of Dublin and Westminster, and issues about mixing Scottish spirit and bonders mixing Scottish spirit and Irish spirit. I realized that bonding was this huge missing piece of the industry, and I decided to bring it back. And the easy way to do that would be to just get a massive IBC of 3-year-old whiskey and then put it in a bottle and say, I'm a whiskey bonder. Congratulations. So that's easy, right? So that's the easy way to do it. So I decided we were gonna make it stand for something. We weren't gonna just like pretend that we were doing it. We were gonna do it in a way that's a bit more defendable and just stands for some level of quality, essentially. So I was kind of an idiot. I decided I'd build a bonded warehouse, and then on the farm here, and the big idea was to sort of build a bonded warehouse and then buy in all of this new make spirit, buy in casks separately, match new make spirit to casks, and then mature them here on site, and then when they're ready, kind of blend them. So that was the first idea. I did that, and then I realized, hang on, I'm going to have to kind of really control end to end all of our process here, because not being able to blend and bottle on site, and not being able to do all of the intricacies that we need to do kind of with the really small blends that we do isn't going to fly. So essentially our definition of modern whiskey bonding is that when it comes to new make whiskey, like, we're shepherding the whiskey from still to glass. You know, a lot of people talk about grain to glass. We do still to glass. And then the big goal is to build this library of Irish whiskey spirit flavors from all over the country, from old and new distilleries, and to have this beautiful bank and library of flavors to pull from to create really unique whiskies moving forward. I'm very transparent about what we do, because that's just how we operate, and that's how I believe whiskey should operate. But that's kind of our definition of it. To be a bonder, you need to have a bond. That's the kind of first thing. You need to source your whiskey from multiple distilleries. You need to go out and source your own casks as well, ideally, because you know, the only influence you're going to have on the spirit is after it comes off the still, so you have to be meticulous about it. And then we blend everything here on site now, and we're bottling everything here on site now as well, and maturing on site. So for us, that's kind of what modern whiskey bonding means. It's being as hands-on in the process as we can after distillation.
So obviously, I know you've just mentioned the fact that you've converted one of your buildings into a rack house. I also believe you're now opening soon for visitors and things like that. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that while we've got you?
Yeah, no, I built that rack house. I didn't convert anything.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it was built, custom built. Built it on a southern aspect. It has a clay floor. It's kind of a Frankenstein kind of maturation warehouse. It's kind of part dunnage, part sort of Kentucky rickhouse, kind of part sort of French craft distillery thing. It's kind of all over the place, but it keeps the it gets a lot of heat in there during the day, essentially, the building, and we get pretty much year-round maturation, because we manage to naturally manage the temperature in there pretty well. So that's custom built. And then on the back of it, there's our blending room, where we do all of our blending now, small scale and big scale. The thing that I converted on site is the barn into the tasting room. So the barn is like it's pre-famine. It's like from 1600s thereabouts. So yeah, that's been converted into a little tasting room. And yeah, we're going to be open on July 20th this year. That's the day that lockdown ends.
Yeah. We're literally going to be straight out the traps.
Yeah. Can we hold you to that one then? July the 20th?
Yeah, you can book now, but like if the government shuts us down on July 19th, like you get your money back. But you know, you can't. We're open for bookings online and everything. We're taking bookings, and we're going to be doing kind of you know, tours at different levels and tastings at different levels. Like we'll be pulling out stuff that we have lying around for people to taste at different levels and things like that. Look, we had no intention of doing this, I'll be very honest with you, until all this lockdown stuff happened, but kind of needs must. So we're opening up the doors and putting a toe in the water and welcoming the people.
And so with your expressions, because obviously you've brought out a few different ones now. I know we spoke last time with Neve about the bucket and things like that. So we also learned a lot about how hard it is and what you can put onto your labels. I mean, how hard are you finding these things? Obviously, from that expression, it's ridiculous. We know.
Look, I don't even want to talk about it.
Yeah. It's a Sunday. Let's just be happy.
Okay, you guys are whiskey guys, right? And you're whiskey people. You guys are being screwed over so badly by what's not allowed to be put on the label. Like, it's you guys, you're the people that I make whiskey for. I'm not allowed to tell you what's in it, how old it is, exactly how it's made. Like, I have had to stop dealing with the with the governmental body that administers this, right? Because I have literally thrown my phone across the room and like swore at people about it. So I have had to remove myself from dealing with the HSE, who are the people who administer labels, because they're administering labels in a way that is designed to hide information from consumers, under the guise of consumer misinformation. There's a really bad file in Europe called 110/2008 that basically doesn't allow, like, under the guise of being transparent to consumers, instead stops you from being completely transparent. So when I released the Gale, I put on the label everything that was in it, every vintage, every cask, etc., etc. And I was threatened with being taken to court and having all of my products recalled, because by giving all of the information about the breakdown of the blend, I was contravening European law, and I was being misleading to the consumer, because I had listed the oldest and the youngest components of the blend. You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to list the youngest thing in the blend. So it's a really kind of a catch-22 law that I've fallen very foul of, and I've fought for a long time. But I can't change it on my own, and there's no impetus in the industry currently to change it. Compass Box in Scotland had exactly the same issue with exactly the same clause. Funnily enough, now Scotland might actually change this reg, because they're no longer underneath the European regs. So you might see a change on this with Scotland, where people are given the option to put in their the transparency on the blend. You will not see that in Irish whiskey, because I've tried to lobby for it and fight for it through various different organizations, and there is no impetus by the industry at this time to change it. So if you want to know what's in our whiskey, ask us on social media. We'll tell you all day long, but we cannot put it on our label.
We was talking to David from France last week about a similar thing with the age statements. Could you not, instead of actually putting an actual age on there, could you not put a vintage of each cask? Would that still come under the same law?
Yeah, it comes under the same law. I tried that. I tried everything, right? I tried that. I tried saying like bonded in 1991, bonded in 2006, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. No, they pull you on it. They pull you on it.
So with the stocks then, so obviously you've bought in some matured stock, and then you're now maturing your own stock in the rack house. How long before we start to see your whiskey that you've matured fully?
You're not going to see the malts for ages, and you're not going to see the pot still for ages. They're showing young. The malts come along a lot actually in the last year. So the oldest malts I have, the baby stuff I have, is 4, right? So that's the younger stuff. Our grain has come on, is fairly, honestly, anybody who visits and who tastes the grain is blown away. And I think it's because of the the wood program that we implemented day one in terms of those particular juicy casks. Like, they're very good. So the Hansen that we just recently released, the Hansen has some of our, it has 30% of our younger grain in it. Yeah. This is 70% 10-year-old grain, and then a 30% 4-year-old grain. So it has some of it in there. And eventually you'll see that ratio change, obviously, as our younger stuff gets older. I have no intention really of releasing any of the malt or the pot still or any of that until it's kind of ready. So it's almost impossible to answer the question. We have had some Bonders blends that we've done. So like, just like JJ Corry did, we do Bonders blends. So we'll work with Master of Malt or Whiskey Exchange or somebody like that to create 200 bottles of something. And sometimes, they'll come over to the farm and they have a flavor profile in mind. And then we just pull a selection of casks for them and then we just blend for 2 days. Yeah. Those guys, like Milroy's, were the first people ever to use our younger malt, the 4-year-old malt, but only as like a tiny little component in the blend, not much. So impossible to answer your question really. Like, I don't have any plans for the younger malt and pot still at this time because they need time. So, and we have enough older stocks to keep us going for quite a while. But the grain stuff is, you're going to start to see it come through because I'm a massive fan of it, and it's showing really, really, really well.
I know I've tasted some of the younger grain. We've had some in the a tasting. I can't remember if it was this last one or the one before. And then
it was the first tweed tasting we did, so it would have been April last year when it was like 2.5 years old.
Yeah, that's the one, and absolutely superb. Yeah. But obviously showing the Hansen there. I mean, I've got a bottle of the Hansen here. Absolutely delicious. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're really look, I'm such a big fan of grain whiskey. It gets such a bad rap. It's brilliant to work with because we have some weird cask experiments going on at the moment, and I've kind of just given up on our malt stocks in relation to our cask influences because it's just really hard to work with in terms of really getting a flavor out of a cask. The grain takes any of those influences so much better. And then the younger kind of stocks that we have they're just kind of gingery and spicy and lovely at the moment. But again, you have to keep an eye on them. So a lot of our younger stocks are in ex-bourbon casks, first fill Jack Daniels casks, and well, not that that's bourbon, but first fill Jack Daniels and Woodford Reserve. And we kind of have to keep an eye on them because they're probably going to have to. A lot of it is probably going to have to come out of those first fill casks pretty soon because there is a tipping point that they take influence so well. You have to watch it. But at the moment, the grain is showing really spectacularly, which is why we started to put it into the Hansen, because we're going to be making bigger batches of the Hansen. It's one of our core products now moving forward, so it'll always be in the portfolio.
Superb. I mean, I am conscious that we've not got a lot of time with you, and I'm pretty sure Omar, obviously a native to your country, has a few questions. So anything you want to ask Omar?
Yeah, why isn't he working on a Sunday? Like that.
What's the
He's
story
supposed
there?
to be defending the country. And
I was out the back painting and fence life, coating my fences. So my wife is no longer speaking to me for the next couple of hours because I left that to come up here and talk to you guys. So that's why I'm drinking.
Fair play.
You mentioned, Louise, that you had pot still. I didn't realize you had.
Yeah, I do. I have a bit of GND pot still, but it's too young. It's too young. Yeah, it's just, for me, it's too young. Like I got it in on spec just to see for the crack, and brought it. Yeah, it's just very, very, very young. So we're going to sit on it for a while and maybe do something with it and see what happens. But yeah.
Are you planning to just work with the likes of GND, or are you hoping to source casks from numerous other distilleries? Because it is quite hard to source casks from certain places, like Middleton don't do it, and Bushmills is getting harder by all accounts. So how are you finding that as a bonder?
Yeah, so some people just won't sell to you, right? They just won't. That's just, it's the way the trade kind of works. But like, look, the cask trading industry, it's really interesting. It's kind of like Hogwarts, right? It's like a very interesting kind of layered world. So you have to work with big guys like GND or Cooley or whoever else, like, because you have to have a big consistent supply. And you like, as a bonder, like for me, it'd be remiss of me not to have like contracts in place for several years with lads, so that I know, okay, I'm cool. They're not going to run out of money, and like they're going to always be there. But yeah, so and then it's kind of about building relationships with individual people and hitting them at a point where they're ready to kind of sell to you. So that's a lot of my time, certainly pre-COVID anyway, was going into that piece of it, because a lot of the smaller lads are kind of coming online for third-party sales this year, really. So hopefully we'll see kind of a lot more of that stock start to come through. But no, it's not easy. Like sourcing stock, it's not like in Scotland where you just click your fingers and it happens. Like the wholesale market in Ireland is in its infancy, and to be honest, like I'm one of the people that's kind of driving it, because and making it sort of move, because you need those kind of middlemen and middlewomen to kind of get bulk stock sort of moving around. So it's quite interesting. It's like a burgeoning category, but with lots and lots of layers of it. Like sometimes I'll buy Irish whiskey from somebody in England who happens to own it. Like it's sitting in Ireland somewhere, but I'll buy it from them because they bought it 25 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. Like it's a real kind of complicated web of traders and brokers sometimes. Yeah, it's interesting.
Just to jump on there then, is there any of the distilleries in Ireland that refuse to have their name put out there if you're buying their stock? Obviously, like in Scotland, you've got Glenfarclas that don't allow second party to name them. Is it similar in Ireland?
It sort of depends. Like, so it depends on who you're purchasing from, to be honest. Like, you're not really allowed, the big lads won't allow you necessarily to put their name on the label. Like there's a clause to use it to sell the product, to use it as a means of selling the product.
Yeah.
But when I do contracts, like I try to put a clause in to say, look, I want to be able to mention in passing, by the way, that's from XYZ place. Because again, we try to be as transparent as we can. Again, not everybody's going to want you to do that either. But so it just depends. But as we kind of go on, we have a particular clause we tend to put in to allow us to say on social media, or when asked in particular, we can use it, but we can't take out a 4-page ad in Whiskey Magazine listing the distillery necessarily. I'm
taking that's probably somebody like Bushmills and things like that then, possibly.
Yeah, I don't have a clause in my contract. I don't know. Like so okay, and this is what sort of bothers me sometimes about the whiskey industry, is that I don't know why, but like it is a bit cloak and daggery like that. Like for whatever reason, people don't want you to talk about this and that. And I think it's changing a little bit, but the Irish whiskey industry is way behind Scotland in that kind of piece. Like the third party wholesale market in Scotland never ended. It kind of ended here. There was just 2 distilleries like going over and back with each other for however many years, really, for a very, very long time. So getting the wholesale market to work properly here again, like it's going to take probably 5 or 10 years, really, to get it properly going. But it's good fun figuring out, like it's a lot of wheeling, dealing in the background, and I quite enjoy that. Like that's actually quite good fun for me.
Has anybody else got questions? No?
Yeah, Louise, you mentioned sourcing casks. I'm interested to hear sort of where you've travelled to source casks and sort of what particularly you've been looking for.
Yeah, so I was supposed to have like this wonderful epic trip this year to Jerez, basically, and all over Europe I had a bunch of like trips actually in the diary. I did manage to get to Kentucky the early side of this year. I have when I get my kind of bourbon casks, I go to Kentucky essentially, and to Louisville, and we have a couple of different sort of repurposing cooperages that we work with, and then we also do some stuff with Beam as well, direct. So when I get my Kentucky casks, I just go there essentially. Then we have a product called the Battalion, which was a tequila finish, basically. Yeah, so we've done a deal now with the distillery in Mexico, because the first time we did it, I got those casks from a cooperage in Maine, in the north of the USA, because it was just an experiment, and I got like 3 casks or 4 casks. So then I decided I was going to incorporate this into the portfolio as a whole. So we've done a deal with a very well-known tequila distillery in Jalisco, and again, I was supposed to go to Jalisco in May to go and meet those guys, but they're going to just put them on a container for us now. And then this year, I had a lot of trips in the diary. We're going to be doing a lot of like sherry casking this year. So we have I have good cask brokers now and a good network in relation to that. And normally I tend to sort of go and visit them and see what's what. But yeah, we won't be going there, but we'll be bringing on that sort of wood essentially. Yeah.
Thank you.
So obviously, if we sort of said to you, you could change one thing about the Irish whiskey industry, what would it actually be if you could only change one thing that really annoys you at the moment?
I wish there was more older malts on the market that I could buy. That'd be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that there's like, there's it all got bought up by a couple of people like a couple of years ago, and there's not a huge amount of it. So, I can lay down as much malt as I want from as many people, but it's going to take me 10 or 15 years like to get it out there. So it means that if you want to grow fast, if you want to make if you can sell a lot of 3-year-old whiskey all day long and that sort of thing, you can do that, but that's not really our model. Our model is more taking older stocks and different flavor profiles and putting them together. And so it just means that I have to be incredibly creative about how we bridge the next 10 or 15 years. So that's really kind of like that's from a business perspective, I guess. The Irish whiskey industry as a whole is brilliant, right? And I know we get a lot, and I've been very vocal about screaming and shouting about how we need transparency, this, that, and the other. That message has landed, like you look at the new guys now that are coming on board, like, the new smaller craft distilleries, like the likes of Killowen and the likes of W.D. O'Connell, for example, not a distillery, but and those kind of guys, like the new guard that are coming through on the second wave are being incredibly transparent about what they're doing. And they're saying, I'm an independent bottler, or I sourced this particular thing here, but I'm making my own stuff. Like very, very, very quickly, the industry immediately sort of like restarted. There was a bit of kind of niggles in the beginning, and now everybody's being pretty open and honest about what they're doing. They're a lovely community. And they're very sort of supportive, like the lads that are in it, and there's a nice little sort of group of us that help each other out when we can. It's an honor. I can't tell you what an honor it is, and to have a second kind of a second wind in my life, and to jump into an industry that's being reborn from and remade essentially after being nearly dead entirely. Being a part of that is a privilege and an honor. And of course, we've had our growing pains, but there's not a huge amount I would change, really.
One question that has come through is, so obviously you've kind of got two names. So you've got the Chapelgate one, the Irish, and then you've got JJ Corry. Is the plans to bring a whiskey out under both names, or will it always come out under JJ Corry?
It'll always be JJ Corry. So the Chapelgate Irish Whiskey Company is just like a business name, Yeah. It's like Diageo makes Johnny Walker.
Yeah.
But we're on a much smaller scale. It just happens to be the registered business name. JJ Corry is the brand. It'll always be the brand. That's what we mean. Yeah.
Right. Anybody else got a question?
Yes, actually I do. Just to jump in quickly, you mentioned
It's not about terroir, is it?
No, you're fine.
I'll talk about terroir all day long. I love terroir.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah, I think
about the tequila.
Louise, can of worms.
I'm just curious as to which type of tequila casks you're getting. Is it the Blanco? Is it the Reposado or Añejo?
Añejo.
Hey, nice one.
Yeah, Añejo.
Really
and it's
proper stuff.
It's also it's the initials of the distillery that I'm getting the cast from are DJ, because I know the distiller Enrique very well, so he's done me a deal on casks, so it's great. So that'll be interesting. Like the whole battalion thing, it was just kind of a wheeze. Like I was actually chasing after kind of a smoky kind of mezcal mesquite flavor, which we didn't get at all from the casks. But what we did end up getting was that kind of lovely kind of agave herbal notes. And we found then, as I was saying, like the grain takes that influence far better than the malt. So we've ditched the malt entirely from from the blend that we put in there, and we just go grain. And you know, we did a similar release of it for a customer in California there a little while back called the Gold Rush, and it was just the grain that had been influenced in those tequila casks, and it was really, really good. It's a lovely, fun flavor profile that I just thought was really interesting. But I am still chasing down. I don't know if you guys know, there's a company called Balcones Distillery in the US.
Yeah,
they're out of Texas. They're really interesting. But they make this really amazing smoked whiskey that's smoked with mesquite, or like, you know, just Texas kind of tumbleweed sort of stuff. And for 2 years, I've been trying to get casks out of them. Like, they're pretty difficult, and I actually know them fairly well. But I'm trying to get these casks out of them to see if I can do a bit of an influence on the grain. No luck yet, but I'm still working on it. But like, yeah, anything smoked, I'm kind of a fan of. You know, I know that isn't really massively traditional, but if we see a flavor profile that we really, really like, we'll see if we can kind of go after it. Like, we have a project on the go with Whistle Pig now, with an Alhambra cask that they've put their rye in, and then they sent it down to Mexico, and the guys down there put a bit of mezcal in it, and now we're going to get the cask and put a bit of grain in it to see what happens, just as a bit of a kind of a round robin.
I was just about to ask you that question about a mezcal cask, sort of in lieu of like peat almost.
Oh, if we can, like, so the problem is, like, not a lot of mezcal is matured, right? You have to season the cask beforehand. And like the real mezcal, like it's made in the palincos, whatever they're called, it's very rough stuff, you know, and not a lot of it is very smoky. So it's a bit of a Western construct, all of that. But that is a flavor profile that we're chasing. In lieu of peat, we're chasing that particular smoke. So I reckon we'll, maybe next year, the year after, we'll figure it out. But it's taking a lot longer than I had anticipated. The battalion, that is what the battalion was supposed to be, and because nobody had used tequila before really for maturing Irish whiskey, we didn't know how it was going to turn out. So it turned out completely differently than we thought it would.
Yeah, I bet.
There's obviously, just more recently, a bit more peated Irish whiskies coming out. Have you got much intention of using peated or releasing fully peated expressions yet?
100%. I'm a massive fan. Huge fan. I think people forget that peated whiskey would have been very traditional in Ireland for a very long time. You know, we have a peat bog down the back here. I love peated whiskey. There are some big and small distilleries now really starting to sort of work with it and experiment with it. So you'll definitely see it from us, specifically because it's a flavor profile that I love anyway. But yeah, definitely. And you're going to see it more and more in Irish as well, because it is traditional. And a lot of the new lads are looking at older recipes and stuff like that to kind of go into the past and bring them back to life. So, you know, we would have malted everything with turf, like peat anyway. Like, obviously, at some point, we all did that. So it just kind of makes sense for it to come back.
Yeah, right. Omar, have you got any last questions for Louise?
Yeah, just on the peat, Louise, the last time I was up there with you, this time last year, roughly, actually, you showed us a very unusual smoky bacon cask.
Yeah.
Absolutely the weirdest cask I've ever nosed. It was like liquid smoky bacon crisps. I don't know if you have them in England, but it was.
Oh yeah.
That is my favourite cask in the rack house. My hands-down favourite.
We are civilized over here. We are civilized over here, Omar. We do have smoky bacon crisps.
Have any plans for it, Louise? Are you going to use it in something?
So we have a customer who's really interested in the whole thing, basically, as an entire kind of bottling. So that was the plan for it. that was the original plan for it. Because anybody that we've ever showed that cask to, they fall in love with it and they want to buy the whole thing. But it's 29 years old, like it's 1991. So I reckon give it another year and it'll probably go out the door. We won't use it for blending though. I don't think, like, I love that cask. And for those of you listening, like, it literally, we call it smoky bacon cask because it smells like smoky bacon. Like that's how it smells, and there's no two ways about it. So it's really, really interesting. And then, but then the palate of it is completely different. So
what is
nose,
the cask?
yeah, the nose and the palate. It's an old Bushmills cask, basically. It's an OBD cask from 1991. It's the 8 series. There's a series of those casks that start with 8 that are very interesting, and I have a load of them. And it's just one of those unique ones. It's like we have a lot of that 8 series that were with a big parcel that I bought that are all they're all related to each other, and they're all completely different whiskies after 30 years in cask. Like they've just gone in the most insane kind of directions. And sometimes it's hard to kind of pinpoint why exactly back along the way, because sometimes there are times of whiskey that old in Ireland, like the record keeping wouldn't have been great, and the kind of history of the cask, kind of like in terms of the physical cask, God knows what was in it prior and all the rest of it. You never really know. But yeah, that's a really interesting cask. We have a good few of those that have good futures to them. Some of them will be single cask, but not many, to be honest, because a lot of them are going like, you know, they're going like that. Some of them will hit 35 years old, and then a lot of them will be blended. But the smoky bacon has a special destination.
And speaking of sort of funny casks, and you know, you obviously have a big drive for innovation and experimentation. Have you tried any sort of alternative woods like cherry wood, mulberry, acacia, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we have acacia on order. We started to experiment a lot as well with kind of virgin woods. Like I was looking at Swedish kind of virgin wood, which is really interesting as well. And the wood program that we have is getting deeper and deeper and deeper in that regard. But the problem with it is that like half the time it doesn't work. You know, there's a reason. Honestly, like there is a reason that a lot of these casks have been used for a very long time and have become traditional, because they're just kind of very well suited. When you start arcing around with new woods and stuff like that, very often it's awful. You know, it's just bad.
Yeah.
No matter how closely you monitor it, you know. So yeah, we can be bonkers on experimentation, but there's no point then going, oh, we found this amazing cask from, you know, Guatemala, and it's amazing and it tastes like shite. Like what's the point, you know? But yeah, to your point, we're looking at lots of options, but not everything works brilliantly.
What I'm going to do now, Louise, because I'm conscious you were needing to get off, so I'm going to end the recording now. You're quite welcome to stay for a little bit longer. Just like to say thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully we can maybe get you on again, but there is one question I'll ask, but I'll ask that away from the recording. But thank you very much for coming on and explaining a little bit more about the company and Irish whiskey.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. It was really awesome.
Thanks, guys.